trying to outline a 10-point action plan for how to do all these things better now. And since then, since January, of course, the situation has got far, far worse.
They thought this secret would never get out, but it did. Princess Anne walked into Windsor Castle carrying evidence that has been hidden for decades, evidence that goes all the way back to Diana. What King Charles saw in that room made him do something nobody saw coming. He froze Camilla's accounts, cut off her access completely. And William, he knew everything.
Boy, man, attacked me, and I did fight back, and I got off. I remember getting off the train and my mother looking at me.
The royal family is in total meltdown right now, and the truth they have been desperately trying to suppress is finally coming out. On the 19th of March, 2026, Buckingham Palace released a statement that was short in length but enormous in consequence. Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles, the two adult children of Queen Camilla from her first marriage, had been formally removed from the royal family trust list. The announcement offered no detailed explanation, no background, and no apology. It simply stated the facts and left the public to draw their own conclusions. For most people watching the news that evening, the story seemed like another chapter in the long-running saga of the British royal family navigating the tension between tradition and modernity. But what was visible to the outside world was only a fraction of what had actually taken place behind closed doors in the weeks leading up to that announcement. The decision had not been made quickly or casually. It was the end result of a chain of events that had been quietly building for some time, beginning not in a palace boardroom or a legal chamber, but in the finance office of the Duchy of Cornwall. The Duchy of Cornwall is one of the most significant financial institutions connected to the British monarchy. It is not simply a property portfolio or a collection of historic estates, though it is certainly those things. It is the primary source of income for the heir to the throne, a self-sustaining private estate that has existed in various forms for more than 7 centuries. Its holdings span farmland, residential properties, commercial sites, and investment assets across England, and its total value runs into the billions of pounds. When Prince William took over stewardship of the duchy, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the accession of King Charles III, he also inherited the responsibility of overseeing its finances with the kind of transparency that the modern monarchy increasingly demands from itself. As part of that push for greater financial accountability, new digital systems had been put in place to monitor transactions within the duchy's operating budget. One of those systems, a secure automated monitoring tool installed specifically to flag unusual activity, was functioning exactly as intended on the morning of March 19th. A routine scan of incoming and outgoing transactions produced an alert. On its own, the alert did not appear dramatic. A transaction had been logged under the category of professional consultancy fees, and the amount attached to it was £42,750. To understand why that figure caused concern, it helps to know the internal spending rules that govern how duchy funds can be used. Any expenditure above £250 that falls outside of pre-approved budget lines requires formal council approval. This is not a bureaucratic technicality, but a deliberate safeguard designed to ensure that public and institutional funds are not redirected without proper authorization. The £42,750 transaction had not gone through that process. It had been logged and processed without the required sign-off, and the automated system had caught it. The senior member of the audit team who first reviewed the alert had spent the better part of his career working within the financial structures of royal institutions. He was experienced enough to know that clerical errors happen, that figures occasionally end up in the wrong column, and that not every anomaly indicates wrongdoing. His instinct, first, was to treat the alert as a possible administrative mistake. He began working through the standard process of verifying the transaction, tracing it back through the system to identify the source, the authorization trail, and the recipient. What he found stopped him cold. The transaction had been split across several line items within the duchy's broader budget, distributed between categories including landscape maintenance and art consultancy. On the surface, both of those categories are entirely legitimate areas of expenditure for an estate the size of the Duchy of Cornwall. Properties require upkeep, and the duchy's holdings include historic buildings and open land that genuinely require professional attention. Art consultancy, similarly, is a reasonable cost when managing buildings with significant collections or when preparing properties for public-facing events. But the way this particular transaction had been structured raised immediate questions. The disbursement pattern did not match the types of contracts that would normally appear in those categories, and the amounts did not align with any documented work orders or approved supplier agreements. When the audit officer traced the payment further, he identified the names of the beneficiaries. They were Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles. Laura Lopes is the daughter of Queen Camilla and her former husband Andrew Parker Bowles. She has worked professionally in the art world for a number of years, primarily as an exhibition director, and has generally kept a low public profile. She has not sought media attention and has not positioned herself as a working member of the royal family. Tom Parker Bowles, her brother, is better known publicly. He has built a career as a food writer and critic, has published several cookbooks, and appears regularly in the press in that capacity. Neither of them holds an official royal title, and neither is part of the working royal family in any formal sense. They are, in the Surreal language of the institution, members of the extended family rather than the core working unit. Their names appearing in the internal financial records of the Duchy of Cornwall was not, on its face, something that could be explained away as routine. The duchy's assets are tied directly to the role of the Prince of Wales. The income they generate is intended to fund the activities of the heir to the throne and to maintain the properties and obligations that come with that role. The principle that underpins the entire structure is clear and long established. Access to those assets and the benefits that flow from them is reserved for those within the direct Windsor line of succession. Individuals who do not carry Windsor blood and do not hold official roles within the institution are not, under the trust's governing rules, eligible to receive payments from those funds. The audit officer sat with this information for some time before deciding how to act. He did not consult colleagues. He did not reach out to anyone higher up the internal chain through normal communication channels. Instead, he began a more detailed review of everything connected to the transaction. He pulled internal emails, cross-referenced payment records, and examined every piece of documentation that carried the same transaction code. What emerged from that review was not a cleaner picture, but a more complicated one. The £42,750 had been carefully distributed to make it blend in with ordinary operational expenditure. This is a method that financial investigators recognize as a technique used to obscure the true nature of a payment, making it harder to identify during routine audits. It is not something that happens accidentally. The structure of the disbursement suggested familiarity with how the duchy's accounting systems worked and a deliberate effort to keep the payment from standing out. There was also something else. Buried within the digital files, connected to the transaction, was a draft document that had not been fully deleted from the system. That document described the £42,750 as a first phase payment, with the implication that further payments had been planned and were intended to follow. The language was internal and informal, the kind of note that exists alongside a larger plan rather than as a standalone record. But its presence in the system changed the nature of what the audit officer was looking at. This was not an isolated mistake or a one-time oversight. It appeared to be the beginning of something that had been intended to continue. He gathered every document he had retrieved, printed each one, and placed them into a sealed security envelope. He did not leave the report with his direct manager or route it through the standard internal reporting structure. Instead, he sent it directly to the office of the King's private secretary, bypassing the usual chain entirely, the Baru. Covering note made clear that what he was submitting was not a routine query, but an urgent matter requiring immediate attention at the highest level. His language was measured but unambiguous. He described the situation as a potential systemic breach of trust regulations and stated plainly that intervention was needed before the matter became public knowledge. By the time that envelope reached Buckingham Palace, the situation had already moved beyond the control of anyone in the duchy's finance department. The information it contained would soon land on the desk of Princess Anne, and from there it would make its way into a meeting at Windsor Castle that nobody outside the immediate royal circle was aware of, a meeting that would ultimately determine the course of events, leading to the announcement on March 19th. What the audit officer could not have known that evening, as he made his way home through the grey London streets was that the £42,750 was not the whole story. It was only the part that the automated system had been designed to catch. The fuller picture, which would only emerge in the days and weeks that followed, was considerably more complex and considerably more serious. 1 week before the public announcement that would remove Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles from the Royal Trust list, a meeting took place at Windsor Castle that very few people knew about, and even fewer were present for. It was not recorded in any official diary. It did not appear on any public schedule. To anyone looking in from the outside, the castle was going about its ordinary business. But inside a small private library, 2 members of the royal family sat across from each other, with a thick green dossier on the table between them, and the conversation that followed would shape everything that came after. Princess Anne has occupied a particular position within the royal family for decades. She is widely regarded as one of the hardest working members of the institution, someone who has consistently prioritized duty over personal comfort and who has little patience for anything that she believes undermines the integrity of the monarchy. She carries the expectations of an older generation of royal thinking, one that places the survival and reputation of the institution above almost every other consideration. Her relationship with Prince William has generally been described as respectful, built on a shared understanding of what the monarchy demands from those who serve it. But the meeting at Windsor Castle was not a routine check-in between relatives. It was something closer to a formal reckoning. Anne had come prepared. The dossier she brought with her contained financial statements, internal transaction records, and supporting documentation that had been drawn from the emergency report submitted by the Duchy of Cornwall's audit department in the days prior. She had reviewed the material carefully before the meeting and had reached conclusions that she believed were not open to much interpretation. What she placed on the table in front of William was not a set of allegations or suspicions. In her view, it was evidence, and the distinction mattered to her. William received each document in silence. Those who know him well describe him as someone who processes difficult information carefully before responding, someone who does not react impulsively, even when the circumstances might justify it. That quality was visible in the way he worked through the dossier. He read each page without interrupting, without making immediate judgments out loud, and without giving Anne any clear indication of what he was thinking as he worked through the material. His expression, by all accounts, was controlled, though the effort that control required was apparent to anyone paying close attention. The financial records in front of him told a story that was difficult to explain away. The £42,750 that had been flagged by the Duchy's automated monitoring system was presented in its full context, including the breakdown of how it had been distributed across different budget categories and the internal draft document suggesting that further payments had been planned. But the transaction itself was only one part of what Anne had brought to the table. The dossier went further, and it was the additional material that changed the nature of what William was looking at. Near the end of the dossier was a document that had been described by those with knowledge of its contents as a leaked internal memorandum. The precise origin of the document and how it came to be included in the material presented to William has not been publicly confirmed. What the memorandum reportedly contained was a proposal, apparently in relatively advanced stages of consideration, to appoint Laura Lopes as the manager of a trust block valued at more than £1.3 billion, the BISL. Details of the proposal, including who had drafted it and through what channels it had been circulated, remain unclear. But the existence of the document and the scale of what it described was not something that could be treated as a minor administrative matter. To understand the significance of that figure, it is worth considering what a trust block of that size would mean within the context of the Duchy of Cornwall's financial structure. The Duchy's total value is estimated to be in the range of £1 billion, and its assets include some of the most significant property holdings in England. A trust arrangement giving an individual authority over a substantial portion of those assets would represent a level of financial influence that goes far beyond anything that could be justified by a consultancy relationship. It would represent, in practical terms, a meaningful degree of control over resources that are supposed to exist solely to support the functioning of the heir to the throne and the official duties that come with that role. For William, the implications were considerable. The consultancy payments, troubling as they were, could conceivably have been the result of poor judgment or a misunderstanding of the rules. They were significant enough to require action, but they existed within a range of outcomes that was still, at least in theory, manageable. The memorandum was something different. If the proposal it described had moved forward, the consequences for the financial integrity of the duchy, and by extension for the credibility of the institution William was preparing to lead, would have been serious and lasting. He sat with that reality for some time. The silence in the library was not uncomfortable in the way that silences sometimes are between people who have nothing to say to each other. It was the silence of two people who understood each other well enough to know that words were not needed at that particular moment. Anne did not push him toward a conclusion. She had made the journey to Windsor and presented the material because she believed it was her responsibility to do so. What happened next was William's decision to make. The internal conflict he was working through was not a simple one. On one side sat his genuine commitment to building a version of the monarchy that could survive in the modern world. One that the public could trust and that operated with a level of openness that previous generations had not always maintained. He and Catherine had invested considerable effort in shaping a public image of the royal family as an institution that was willing to be held accountable, that understood its relationship with the people it represented, and that did not consider itself above scrutiny. Allowing financial irregularities of this nature to be quietly absorbed into the background would have been a direct contradiction of everything that image was built on. On the other side sat the human complexity of the Haru situation. Queen Camilla was his stepmother. Whatever the nature of their personal relationship over the years, she was a central figure in his father's life and in the life of the institution. Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles were her children. Taking decisive action against them meant accepting that the consequences would fall not only on them, but on her as well, and by extension on the broader family. William was not unaware of that. He was also not unaware of the position his father, King Charles, occupied in relation to this situation, caught between his loyalty to his wife and his obligations to the throne. But when William reached the final page of the dossier and sat with the full picture of what it contained, the internal calculation shifted. The scale of what was described in the memorandum was not something that could be attributed to a misunderstanding or a lapse in administrative judgment. It pointed toward a deliberate and organized effort to establish a presence within the duchy's financial architecture, one that had no legitimate basis under the rules governing those assets. Whatever the motivations behind it, the outcome, had it gone unchallenged, would have been a significant transfer of influence over resources that were never meant to be accessible to those outside the direct royal line. William closed the dossier. The sound was quiet, but carried a finality that both people in the room recognized. He stood, moved to the window, and looked out over the grounds of Windsor Castle as the light began to fade across the lawns and tree lines that stretched beyond the estate walls. He did not speak immediately, and Anne did not press him. When he did eventually signal his position, it was not through a dramatic declaration or an emotional response. It was through the particular stillness that comes from someone who has made a difficult decision and accepted the weight of it. The course of action he had settled on was clear in its basic outline. There would be no exceptions, no quiet resolution that allowed the situation to be managed internally without consequences, and no preferential treatment extended to members of the extended family at the expense of the rules that govern the institution. Whatever the cost to personal relationships within the family, the duchy's assets and the trust structures connected to them would be protected in full accordance with the regulations that existed to govern them. What neither William nor Anne could fully anticipate in that room was how quickly the situation would move once the process was set in motion. The administrative actions that followed from William's decision would unfold rapidly, and before long, the story would be well beyond the control of any single person within the palace. The media, Parliament, and the public were all about to become part of what had, until that evening, been a private family matter conducted behind some of the most secure walls in the country. The morning that the story became public was the morning that everything changed in ways that could no longer be contained within the walls of any palace. A major British newspaper led with a headline that named Laura Lopes directly and described in considerable detail a plan to place her in control of a financial trust connected to the Duchy of Cornwall worth more than £1.3 billion. The report included references to internal transaction codes, consultancy payments, and draft memoranda that, according to the paper's sources, should never have been accessible outside a very small circle of senior council members. The story moved quickly across news platforms and social media, and by mid-morning, it had reached an audience far beyond the readership of a single publication. For Queen Camilla, the appearance of her daughter's name on the front page of a national newspaper, in that context, was a moment that no amount of experience with public life could have fully prepared her for. She had spent a significant part of her adult life navigating the particular pressures that come with proximity to the British royal family. She had endured years of intense media scrutiny, public criticism, and a level of personal exposure that few people outside the institution can fully appreciate. She had, over time, and with considerable effort, rebuilt her public standing to the point where she was widely accepted in her role as queen consort. The process had not been easy, and the position she now occupied had not come without personal cost. Seeing Laura's name attached to a financial scandal of this nature, framed in the language of misappropriation and institutional overreach, landed with a force that was both professional and deeply personal. Laura had, by general agreement, maintained a careful distance from the kind of attention that comes with being connected to the royal family. She had built a career in the art world on her own terms, had avoided public controversies, and had not sought to leverage her family connections in ways that would draw scrutiny. The version of her daughter that appeared in the newspaper that morning bore very little resemblance to the person Camilla knew, and that gap between public narrative and private reality was its own particular kind of pain. Camilla's instinct was not to panic. Those who have observed her over the years describe a woman who tends to process difficult situations with a degree of composure that does not always reflect the full extent of what she is feeling. She sat with the newspaper and read through it carefully, working through the details with the methodical attention of someone who understands that reacting before fully understanding a situation rarely leads anywhere useful. But reading carefully did not make the contents easier to absorb. The level of internal detail in the reporting suggested that whoever had provided information to the paper had access to documents and communications that were supposed to be confidential. The leak itself was a significant event, separate from the substance of what had been leaked. Her own reading of the consultancy payments was different from the way they were being characterized in the press and, she believed, from the way they were being handled within the palace. From her perspective, the arrangement had been a form of family support, a recognition of the fact that her children had made sacrifices when she entered a relationship, and eventually a marriage that placed all of them under a level of public attention they had not chosen and had not been raised to navigate. The idea that those payments constituted fraud, or that Laura and Tom had been engaged in a deliberate effort to exploit the financial systems of the duchy, did not align with how she understood the situation. She did not see the same pattern of calculated wrongdoing that the reporting described. That difference in interpretation was at the heart of the tension that had been building between Camilla and William in the days before the story became public, and it did not resolve itself when the newspaper landed on tables across the country. If anything, the public exposure of the situation hardened the positions on both sides. William's office had been moving toward a formal response that prioritized transparency and accountability, in keeping with the position he had taken since reviewing the dossier at Windsor Castle. Camilla's instinct was to seek a different path, one that allowed for a more measured process, an independent review perhaps, or at the very least a period in which her children could respond to the allegations before any formal action was taken. Inside Buckingham Palace's communications office, the tension between those two positions was playing out in real time. The people responsible for managing the institution's public messaging were caught between two sets of instructions that pointed in different directions. On one side, there was a clear directive from William's office that the response to the media coverage needed to be direct, that any suggestion of an attempt to manage or minimize the story would be more damaging in the long run than straightforward acknowledgement of the facts. On the other side, there was a preference from the King's office for a more careful approach, one that kept the family dimension of the situation out of public view as much as possible, and handled the matter in ways that did not further expose individuals who had not been formally charged with anything. The result was a communications environment that was, by all accounts, extraordinarily difficult to work in. Draft statements were written, revised, and discarded. The language that satisfied one set of requirements failed to meet another. People who were present in the office during those hours described a situation in which the normal processes for managing royal communications had effectively broken down, replaced by a kind of improvised crisis management that reflected the unusual nature of what was happening. On digital platforms, the story was moving faster than any official response could keep up with. Posts comparing the consultancy payments to the financial pressures facing ordinary working people in Britain were circulating widely. The framing was straightforward and, for many people, compelling. At a time when the cost of living had placed significant strain on households across the country, the idea of tens of thousands of pounds being redirected from a royal institution to individuals who were already connected to considerable wealth and privilege did not sit well. The monarchy has always been sensitive to this kind of comparison, aware that its continued public support depends in part on a perception that it takes its responsibilities seriously and does not treat institutional resources as a personal benefit. William was watching the public response closely, the monitoring reports coming into Kensington. Palace gave a detailed picture of how the story was being received, and the picture was not encouraging. The volume of negative commentary was significant, and the speed at which it was growing suggested that the window for managing the situation through careful messaging was closing. His own position had not shifted since the meeting at Windsor Castle. If anything, the public reaction reinforced what he had already decided. The longer the institution appeared to be managing rather than addressing the situation, the worse the eventual outcome would be. The most direct confrontation between William and Camilla during this period took place in a corridor within the palace, away from staff and formal settings. It was not a planned meeting, but one of those encounters that happens in a shared space when two people have been avoiding a conversation that both of them know is necessary. There were no raised voices. The exchange was described by those with knowledge of it as brief and weighted. Two people speaking to each other, with the particular restraint that comes from being in a situation where almost everything has already been said through other channels. Camilla asked for time. She wanted an independent inquiry, a process that would allow Laura the opportunity to put her own account of the payments on the record before any final decisions were made. She was not asking for the matter to be dismissed or for the evidence to be ignored. She was asking for a process that she felt was fair to her daughter as a person, not simply to the institution as an entity. The request was a reasonable one on its own terms. As a mother watching her child become the subject of a public financial scandal, the desire for due process was entirely understandable. William's response, or rather the absence of one, made his position clear without requiring words. The legal and administrative process was already in motion. The documentation that had been submitted to the palace, combined with the findings of the ongoing internal review, had produced a set of conclusions that the institution's legal department had assessed as requiring formal action. The space for the kind of independent inquiry Camilla was describing had effectively closed by the time she asked for it. Whether that outcome was the result of a deliberate decision or simply the pace at which events had moved is a question that has not been resolved publicly. What was clear by the end of that corridor encounter was that the situation had moved beyond the point where family dynamics could meaningfully influence the outcome. The story was in the public domain. Parliament was paying attention. The institution's legal and financial advisors were already engaged, and the formal announcement that would remove Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles from the trust list was only days away. The formal ultimatum arrived without warning and without warmth. In the days following the public exposure of the story, William directed his private secretary's office to issue a demand for a full and documented explanation from both Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles. The communication was official in tone and exhaustive in its requirements. It asked for complete asset declarations, records of every consultancy engagement that had been used to justify the payments, and a detailed legal explanation for why the £42,750 had been charged to Duchy of Cornwall accounts in the first place. The document was sealed with the formal markers of William's office and left no room for ambiguity about what was being asked or what the consequences of an inadequate response might be. The decision to issue the ultimatum in that form, rather than through a quieter or more informal process, reflected how completely William's thinking had shifted since the meeting at Windsor Castle. He was no longer approaching the situation as a family matter that had become complicated. He was approaching it as an institutional problem that happened to involve family members, and the distinction shaped everything about how he proceeded. Any blurring of personal loyalty and professional obligation had, in his view, the potential to cause exactly the kind of damage to public trust that the monarchy could least afford. The ultimatum was not an act of personal hostility. It was, in his framing, an act of institutional responsibility. For Laura Lopes, receiving that document was a rupture. Whatever her understanding of the payments had been, and whatever she believed about her own position in relation to the Windsor family, the language of the ultimatum placed her unambiguously on the outside. It did not treat her as the daughter of the Queen Consort or as someone with a long-standing, if informal, connection to the institution. It treated her as an individual who had received funds she was not entitled to, and who was now required to justify that receipt in legal terms. The emotional impact of that reframing was significant. She had not positioned herself as someone trying to exploit the system. She had understood the payments as something closer to family support, a recognition of a relationship rather than a transaction requiring formal authorization. Being asked to produce legal justification for something she had not understood in legal terms placed her in an extremely difficult position. She began gathering documents, exhibition records, correspondence, invoices from her professional work in the art world. The process of searching through that material for something that might serve as a retrospective justification for payments she had not initially questioned was, by any measure, a stressful and demoralizing exercise. The documents she was able to produce did not, in the end, provide the kind of clear and verifiable basis that the Duchy's legal department was looking for. Tom Parker Bowles approached the situation differently, though not more successfully. His professional life had given him a familiarity with public attention and media dynamics that his sister did not share in the same way, and his initial response carried a degree of pragmatic calculation alongside the personal distress that the situation inevitably produced. He understood, perhaps more quickly than Laura, that the reputational consequences of what was unfolding extended well beyond the question of the payments themselves. His public profile, his media relationships, and the business ventures he had built around his food writing career were all, to varying degrees, dependent on an association with the royal family that was now being formally severed. The loss of access to the internal financial systems was not simply a legal and financial matter. It had direct and immediate implications for the professional identity he had constructed over many years. He attempted to make contact with relevant offices within the palace, and found that the channels through which he might previously have expected a response were no longer functioning in the way they had. The protection that proximity to the institution had previously provided was, in practical terms, no longer available to him. Queen Camilla's efforts to intervene on behalf of her children had not produced the outcome she had been working toward, and William's position had not shifted in response to her representations. When the explanations submitted by both Laura and Tom were reviewed by the legal department, the assessment was that they did not meet the required standard. The documentation provided was considered insufficient to establish a legitimate basis for the payments under the rules governing Duchy of Cornwall expenditure. William acted on that assessment without delay. He signed the order to remove their names from the trust list, and the administrative process that followed moved with a speed that reflected the seriousness with which the institution was treating the matter. In the palace's central records system, the two accounts associated with Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles were deactivated. Access arrangements, privilege provisions, and associated benefits were withdrawn. The official notice that appeared on the royal family's website and on the Buckingham Palace bulletin board the same afternoon made no reference to the internal process that had led to this outcome. It was brief and procedural in its language, but the removal of the two names from the trust list was, in context, a statement that required no elaboration. Its meaning was clear to anyone following the story. What happened next moved the situation into territory that nobody within the palace had anticipated when the automated monitoring system first flagged the consultancy payment. The financial audit had, without anyone intending it to, disturbed something that ran considerably deeper. The cybersecurity team operating within Windsor Castle's security infrastructure had been conducting a parallel review of the institution's digital systems, prompted in part by concerns that the leak of internal documents to the press suggested a broader vulnerability in how sensitive information was being protected. What that review uncovered was a pattern of unauthorized access attempts directed at the Duchy of Cornwall's internal data storage systems. The access attempts had not targeted financial accounts directly. They appeared instead to have been focused on a different category of sensitive material, specifically unpublished property development plans and records of strategic partnerships connected to the duchy's investment activities. The digital traces left by these access attempts pointed toward endpoints that had previously been associated with technical work carried out for Tom Parker Bowles's professional ventures. A young programmer who had been contracted to handle website development and technical maintenance for businesses connected to Tom Parker Bowles was identified as the individual responsible for creating the unauthorized access points. The backdoors he had installed into systems he had legitimately worked on had given him access to material that went far beyond anything within the scope of his original contract. When the Windsor security team's monitoring systems closed in on the access points and began mapping the full extent of the intrusion, the programmer's attempts to delete evidence only made his activity more visible rather than less. Each deletion created a new anomaly in the monitoring data. Arrest warrants were approved and executed in the early hours of the morning. The operation was conducted without any public announcement, by unmarked vehicles, and without the kind of visible police presence that would have attracted immediate attention. The seized devices and storage media contained encrypted communications that described the use of internal institutional information to provide competitive advantages to business associates connected to Tom Parker Bowles. The content of those communications transformed what had begun as a financial irregularity within the duchy's accounts into something that investigators and prosecutors were now treating as a matter of economic espionage and criminal misappropriation of confidential information. The news that law enforcement had formally entered the situation reached Queen Camilla in a way that, by all accounts, cut through whatever composure she had managed to maintain during the preceding weeks. The involvement of the police meant that the matter had passed beyond any point at which royal institutional processes could contain or manage it. She had spent the previous days working through whatever options remained available to her, looking for a way to protect her children from the full consequences of what was unfolding. Those options had now effectively disappeared. The financial restitution came quickly. The £42,750 was returned to the Duchy of Cornwall's accounts within hours of the formal legal pressure being applied, but the repayment did not function as a resolution. It was read, both within the institution and by the commentators covering the story, as a concession made under duress rather than a voluntary acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It satisfied the immediate financial question without addressing the broader issues of trust and institutional integrity that the entire episode had raised. The permanent ban on palace access that William signed applied to both Laura and Tom. The practical consequences of that ban were immediate and extensive. For Laura, the withdrawal of her connection to the institution carried significant social and professional implications in the circles she had moved in. Invitations she would previously have received stopped coming. Relationships that had been shaped by her proximity to the royal family reconfigured themselves in ways that reflected the new reality. The professional identity she had, built with care and discretion over many years, now sat in a different context, one she had not chosen and could not easily manage. For Tom, the consequences extended into the legal and financial domain in ways that threatened the business structures he had built. When prosecutors confirmed that there were sufficient grounds to pursue criminal charges related to unauthorized access and misappropriation of confidential information, the commercial relationships that had sustained his ventures began to unravel. Business partners distanced themselves. Investors reassessed their positions. The association with the royal family that had previously added a certain credibility to his professional profile now functioned in precisely the opposite way. In Parliament, the scandal became a reference point for a broader conversation about the oversight of royal finances. Members of Parliament who had been calling for greater transparency and tighter regulatory frameworks around how royal institutional funds are managed found in the story a concrete and highly visible example of what inadequate oversight could produce. Investigative files were passed to prosecutors, and the legislative mood shifted toward a more structured approach to financial accountability within royal institutions. Queen Camilla withdrew from public-facing engagements during this period to a degree that was noticed and commented on. The isolation she was experiencing was not simply the result of her children's situation, though that was clearly its primary cause. It also reflected the dynamics within the palace itself, where her attempts to influence the outcome had not succeeded and where her position now carried a different kind of weight than it had before the story broke. She continued to carry out her formal duties, but the ease and confidence that had characterized her public presence in recent years was visibly diminished. William, for his part, had achieved what he set out to achieve. The duchy's financial systems had been protected, the trust regulations had been enforced, and the institution had demonstrated, through the actions it took, that no individual connection to the royal family conferred immunity from the rules that governed it. Parliament had been shown that the palace was capable of holding itself accountable. The public had been given a visible demonstration that the kind of financial discipline William had committed to was more than a rhetorical position. But the cost of those outcomes was real and lasting. A family that had navigated enormous complexity over many years, and that had arrived at a functioning, if imperfect, arrangement, had been fractured in ways that were unlikely to repair themselves quietly. The people most directly affected by the decisions of the preceding weeks were living with consequences that went well beyond the financial and the institutional. And the man who had made those decisions understood, standing in the gardens of Buckingham Palace as the city's lights came on across the horizon, that protecting an institution and preserving the human relationships within it are not always compatible goals, and that the moment you lead, you will sometimes be required to choose between them.